On D-Day, thousands of paratroopers jumped into the night believing they were the spearhead of the greatest invasion in history.
The troop carriers are in position, and out go the bundles of equipment to be followed by the soldiers. Their ripcords are fastened in the plane, and the chutes open automatically.
Flak tore the formation apart, and pilots lost control. By sunrise, nearly 75% of the men were nowhere near their targets, some miles off, some completely alone behind enemy lines. How did an operation this important go so catastrophically wrong? By early 1944, the war had reached a breaking point. The Allies had momentum, but not victory. Germany still controlled most of Western Europe, and every month that passed meant more lives lost and more cities destroyed. Everyone knew the war couldn't end until the Allies punched through Hitler's Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile chain of bunkers, mines, artillery, and concrete, designed to make any invasion a bloodbath. So while the public saw cheerful newsreels of American troops drinking tea with British families, behind the scenes, the pressure was brutal. Over 1.9 million Allied soldiers were now crammed into southern England. Americans, Brits, Canadians, Free French, Poles. Towns turned into barracks, fields turned into airstrips, and every harbor filled with landing craft. It looked like a giant operation was coming, but nobody knew where or when. And that uncertainty wasn't accidental. The Allied High Command had created one of the biggest deception operations in military history, Operation Bodyguard. Its job? Convince Hitler that the invasion would land anywhere except Normandy. Fake radio traffic, inflatable tanks, dummy camps, misleading troop movement, even a whole phantom army led by George S. Patton were staged across Britain to sell the lie. Inside the camps, soldiers heard rumors about Norway. Others were told Calais. A few heard whispers about the Balkans. Paratroopers trained in open fields, forests, coastlines, and mock towns without being told which one mattered. It wasn't poor planning. It was psychological warfare aimed at keeping 150,000 men ready for every possibility, but sure of nothing. And the stakes were terrifyingly high. If the invasion failed, there would be no second chance. Another attempt would require years of buildup. The Soviet Union was already losing millions on the Eastern Front. Hitler was accelerating the production of V-weapons. Civilians across Europe were starving. A failed landing meant Germany could fortify for a generation. That is why D-Day mattered so much. Not just as a military operation, but as the moment the world gambled everything on one dawn, one tide, and one fragile plan. And it's in this pressure cooker of secrets, fear, and deception that the paratroopers prepared for the jump that would scatter them across Normandy. After Germany invaded and occupied northwestern France in May 1940, the Allies were left plotting how to strike back. Britain had narrowly escaped disaster at Dunkirk, and the United States only entered the war in December 1941. By 1942, British and American commanders were actively planning a major invasion across the English Channel, a bold effort to reclaim Europe from Nazi control. Planning intensified in 1943. Adolf Hitler, anticipating an Allied landing along France's northern coast, put General Erwin Rommel in charge of strengthening defenses, tasking him with completing the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile network of bunkers, mines, and beach obstacles designed to repel any invasion. The Germans, however, did not know exactly where the Allies would strike, leaving gaps in their preparations. Meanwhile, the Allies amassed staggering resources in England. Over 7 million tons of supplies, including 450,000 tons of ammunition, were transported across the Atlantic in the months leading up to the invasion. Allied leaders, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, recognized that a successful cross-channel assault would be critical to opening a second front, relieving pressure on the Soviets, and beginning the liberation of Western Europe. In January 1944, General Dwight Eisenhower took command of Operation Overlord. The Allies also implemented a massive deception campaign designed to convince the Germans that the main invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais, or even Norway. Fake equipment, phantom armies led by General George Patton, double agents, and fraudulent radio transmissions all played a part. By early June 1944, more than 156,000 troops, American, British, and Canadian, were ready to storm Normandy, beginning the largest amphibious assault in history and setting the stage for the liberation of Europe. On the night of June 5th to 6th, 1944, what was supposed to be a precise airborne assault quickly dissolved into confusion, chaos, and catastrophe. Over 900 C-47 transport planes carried thousands of paratroopers into the darkness over Normandy. But almost from the moment they crossed the coast, the mission began to unravel. Fog, cloud cover, and intense anti-aircraft fire forced pilots into frantic, formation-breaking maneuvers. Inexperience, heavy loads, and navigational breakdowns multiplied mistakes. And by the time the jump lights blinked on, many soldiers leapt into the unknown. The first major obstacle was nature itself. Low clouds and dense ground fog over the drop zones broke up tightly planned formations. Wind gusts, estimated at over 20 knots, carried aircraft off course. Pilots, many flying under fire for the first time, struggled to maintain their flight paths. As they twisted and climbed to avoid both terrain and enemy fire, the formation disintegrated. According to after-action reports from the U.S. 82nd Airborne, many transports were flying at excessive speeds and altitudes by the time they reached their DZs. Then came the German defenses. 20mm and 88mm anti-aircraft batteries wreaked havoc on the transport's deadly precision as they approached the coastline. Pilots twisted and climbed, desperately trying to evade flak. But the evasive actions made accurate drops nearly impossible. Many paratroopers were pushed out too early to escape fire, landing far from their intended zones. Pathfinder teams, small groups of soldiers dropped first to set up radar beacons and signal lights, paid a particularly steep price. Dozens were scattered under fire or landed in swamps and marshes instead of their intended target zones. In one sector, only 38 out of 120 Pathfinders landed on their correct drop zones. Even those who set up their beacons were often too far from the intended location to guide following waves. The main body of paratroopers faced the brutal challenge of jumping with heavy loads, up to 80 to 100 pounds of gear, including radios, demolition kits, and ammunition. Strong winds and disorganized formations made controlling their descents nearly impossible. Many landed hard, breaking bones, or fell into flooded marshes and drowned under the weight of their equipment. Gliders carrying troops and heavy equipment crashed into hedgerows, compounding the chaos. By dawn, the scale of the disruption was staggering. Paratroopers were scattered over miles of countryside. Elements of the 82nd Airborne landed as far as 9 kilometers from their intended zones. Hundreds of soldiers were isolated, cut off, or injured before they could assemble. Small groups, often strangers to one another, formed improvised scratch units under fire, taking on objectives as best they could. Several historical accounts suggest that as few as 10% of paratroopers landed exactly on target, with another 25% within a mile, and the rest scattered by 2 miles or more. Yet despite the clouds, flak, lost Pathfinders, and drowned men, the airborne mission succeeded in sowing disarray among German defenses. Dispersed units disrupted lines, secured key roads, and slowed reinforcements from reaching the beaches. What should have been a catastrophe became a brutal testament to adaptability, courage, and the unpredictable nature of warfare. In the chaos of that night, paratroopers transformed confusion into a tactical advantage, ensuring the opening hours of D-Day set the stage for the liberation of Normandy. While planners had hoped for tight formations, the dispersal had unexpected benefits. German commanders, observing troops seemingly everywhere, assumed a larger force was at work. Panic set in, and reinforcements were delayed as units hesitated. unsure of the threat's actual size. Even tiny groups made enormous impacts. 18-man teams captured bridges and crossroads, while other soldiers cut telephone lines, ambushed convoys, or set up roadblocks. One striking example was General Maxwell Taylor, who himself landed miles from the designated zone. Instead of waiting, he immediately began reorganizing scattered groups, demonstrating leadership under fire that inspired his men to act despite isolation. At Utah Beach, the chaos paradoxically mirrored the airborne experience. The 4th Infantry Division landed off course, but instead of disaster, the error allowed them to face weaker German defenses. Their unexpected landing, combined with airborne pockets blocking reinforcements, allowed the Americans to achieve one of the day's critical victories. The British 6th Airborne Division achieved equally impressive feats. Despite scattered drops and heavy German fire, they held the vital Pegasus Bridge and destroyed the Merville Battery, neutralizing threats that could have annihilated landing troops. Each of these victories stemmed from adaptability, courage, and improvisation, proving that even a failed plan on paper could succeed in reality. Maps and operational reports told a misleading story. Commanders at headquarters believed that, with 75% of troops off target, the airborne mission had failed. Radios were lost or destroyed, leaving scattered units isolated and invisible to Central Command. Yet airborne doctrine always emphasized aggressive, independent action. Even if troops landed far from designated drop zones, they were expected to create havoc behind enemy lines. This misalignment between expectations and doctrine explains why early assessments of the operation appeared disastrous, even though the mission was a success. In the months following D-Day, Allied commanders carefully analyzed what went right and what went wrong. Navigational techniques improved, Pathfinder teams were better coordinated, and future drops were placed closer to strategic objectives, reducing the risk of scattered landings. But for the paratroopers on the ground that night, the experience was terrifying. Many felt abandoned, thrown into a blender, with no clear path to safety. Yet others recalled it as their finest hour, where adaptability, quick thinking, and raw courage turned potential disaster into triumph. Historians now view the night of the drop as an essential example of flexible warfare. Despite scattered landings, nearly every primary objective, aside from a few coastal causeways, was achieved. German reinforcements were delayed for crucial hours, giving beach landings the breathing room needed to secure positions. The chaos also had unexpected tactical benefits. Had paratroopers landed neatly in tight clusters, German artillery and small arms could have decimated them in concentrated volleys. Instead, dispersion created confusion, dispersed risk, and increased survivability. D-Day itself was the culmination of years of planning and global cooperation. Operation Overlord combined naval, air, and land forces on a scale never seen before. Over 2 million Allied troops from more than a dozen nations were staged in Britain, with 9 million tons of supplies shipped across the Atlantic. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels escorted more than 132,000 ground troops to the beaches, while air forces flew over 14,000 sorties to provide close support. The airborne assaults, despite heavy casualties, successfully disrupted German lines, delaying reinforcements and weakening the Atlantic Wall defenses. The success of D-Day was not just about numbers, but also about the coordination of multiple fronts. Lessons learned from Dieppe and Anzio, combined with Allied strategic bombing campaigns, control of the Atlantic, and diversionary operations in Italy and the East, ensured that Normandy would be vulnerable. 10 weeks later, a second invasion in southern France further stretched German defenses. At the same time, Operation Bagration destroyed the German Army Group Center in the east, preventing the Wehrmacht from responding effectively. Even the protracted Normandy campaign after D-Day underscored the strategic brilliance of the operation. Dense hedgerows, rugged terrain, and stubborn German resistance slowed the Allied advance, but the bridgehead held. Over 3 months, the Allies pushed inland, linking up with French resistance forces, capturing towns, and gradually forcing the Germans back. By the end of August, northern France was liberated, and Germany's western front began to collapse. D-Day was not an isolated success. It was the opening move of a continent-spanning, meticulously coordinated campaign that would ultimately crush Nazi Germany. In hindsight, the scattered paratroopers of Normandy exemplify the paradox of war. Chaos often creates opportunity. What appeared as missteps and tactical failures on the map became acts of heroism and innovation on the ground. Operation Overlord proved that meticulous planning, combined with courage, improvisation, and international cooperation, could overcome even the most formidable defenses. The Normandy airborne assaults remind us that even in apparent disaster, determined action can turn the tide, and that sometimes the messiest plans yield the most decisive victories. D-Day showed courage, chaos, and strategy all at once. Paratroopers and soldiers turned confusion into victory. If you want to see more such incredible stories from history, subscribe now and follow the stories that shaped the world.